All right, guys, we have Richard Diaz back on the show. He has come. This is his third time he's been on the show, and I've got a buddy who always messages me. He goes, "Just tell me when Rich is back on. That's the only time I listen to your podcast." It's like,
No.
thanks, man.
Is it really
So,
three?
anyways, yeah, this is our third time, man.
Oh, fuck. I don't even, honestly, I thought it was two. So there you
Yeah,
go.
there you go.
I know it's not my first time. You
Yeah,
always remember your first time, right? So,
yeah. I'm just gonna keep messaging Rich every week and try and get him on once a
no,
month.
happy to be here, man. I think you guys do really good work. And no, happy to just have a chat. So thank you. And I apologize for the fact that we're doing it in my kitchen. And if you hear any noise like drills or hammers or screams or whatever, that's because I've just moved into my new place and we're just still trying to get it up and going.
Yeah, I heard you got stuck in Portugal because of
I did.
the oligopolies. You somehow
Yeah.
related it back to economics.
Well, I mean, it's exactly what it is, right? So there's like basically two airlines in Canada. But yeah, I mean, it's just yeah. And listen, don't feel bad for me. I was staying with my aunt and uncle, and they're great, and it was it's a great situation for me, to be perfectly honest with you. I just feel bad for all the people who don't work remotely and don't have these bogus jobs. You can just sit in front of the computer all day. So
Yeah, and like especially if they had to, pay for hotels or
yeah.
something along, like had to come back for a serious meeting. Like say you were like a nurse or
Childcare,
something,
school,
childcare.
everything, all this
Yeah,
stuff. It's. I mean,
crazy,
I had to
crazy.
wait 7 days. Originally, I was offered 10. But So, anyways, we're
Yeah,
back in
we're
the
back.
comfy confines of Montreal.
All right, man. So, like I said kind of before, we're gonna share some of your tweets. I'll
Ooh,
read them out,
okay, exciting.
and
This is
then
new. I've never done this before.
yeah, I think it's
Uh-oh, what
cool.
if I've made a mistake?
I've been doing this. I've been doing this a little bit with
Okay,
some of my
cool.
YouTube videos. So I just kind of,
Appreciate it.
and then let's just talk about it. So
Sure.
this is from Rich. So Canada's real GDP per capita fell in Q2. This brings us to 3 years of decline from the most recent peak. With the 1990s, the gray line you can see on Rich's awesome chart here, experience of fertility well within reach. So for people who aren't as smart as you, what does
Uh-oh.
this mean?
Well, thank you. Okay, so I think there's a couple of things you need to think about. Just so for people who may not know, so real GDP. So what does real mean? Real means adjusted for inflation. So that means the changes in the price level. GDP is gross domestic product. That is a very blunt force way of measuring the output of a given economy, warts and all. There are people who will complain and say GDP is not a good measure. We get it. I would submit to all those people complaining for them to come up with a better way. And then per capita is really, really important for especially us right now in Canada, because if you changes in population can hide, or I mean, hide is a nefarious way of saying it, but can augment a productive capacity of an economy. And so, what we try to do there is by using real GDP per capita, is really dial in to the improvement or lack thereof of the productive capacity per person for a given economy. And GDP per capita is also a kind of a very, again, blunt force way of appreciating a country's standard of living. And so you'll look at, thank you. That's really that's what we're doing here. And so what we've done is I've rebased the GDP per capita for each of the different cycles. And if you actually scroll down, I think it's worth looking, if I may. Sorry to
Yeah.
tell you what to
Yeah,
do
you
on
can
your own
see, right? Yeah.
podcast. So
You
if
want
you
me to open
click
this
on that,
chart up?
yeah, click on that.
Yeah.
Break that bigger. What we've done is so this is what I've done. So I've showed the real GDP per capita from as far as I could get it, 1960, I believe, all the way to now. And you can see the different cycles. And what I wanted to show was how what we're going through right now is actually one of the worst declines in standard of living that we've ever really witnessed. I mean, in 1, 2, 3 generations, however you want to couch it. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So a quick question is that so GDP just came out, right? And for the
Yeah.
quarter and it was negative,
Yeah.
meaning and that number has been kind of positive for a long time. Maybe there's been like a little bit of a pullback when it was during COVID, but it's frankly, we haven't technically been in a technical recession, as some economists would say. And then people would argue, I would argue, I'm sure you would argue, that we never hit that recession because we had so many people come to the country that they had to go out and spend money.
Yeah. So there's different ways of calculating GDP. There's something called the production approach. There's something called the income approach. There's something called the expenditure approach. We're not gonna spend too much time on that. But what I think it's also important to think about GDP, or again, the productive capacity of an economy, is thinking about the productive capacity of each individual, or excuse me, the average individual, times the number of individuals in an economy. Okay, so you get like A times B equals your GDP. And so so that's just a different way of thinking. And so what we've been witnessing, or what we have witnessed in Canada, is a collapse in the former, a collapse in the productivity growth of the average Canadian, and that has been hidden or supplemented or supplanted by more people, just literally more warm bodies. And that's why GDP growth per se has not declined, but GDP per capita, as you can see on this chart, has basically been flat for 10 years.
Yeah, we're
And so
looking
you can
at like
see that. So what I did in the chart, we're going to get back to the chart above. So what I did was just simply, this is a very sort of simple way of highlighting how badly we've done, B, comparing it to previous cycles, which is something people like me and strategists do a lot to give us some context, and then to seeing and then looking at the progression, trying to figure out where we are right now, how it compares to previous cycles. Are we good? Are we bad? And then the next question is why. And so each of those little points, you can see a little text box in 1974, 1981, etc. And then on the other chart, and so I've just rebased it to the peak. So if you go back to the other chart, you can see that basically compares. So click on that one. Yeah, you can see what we've done and how badly we've done. And so you can see 2008. I mean, some of you are familiar with it. Obviously, that was a pretty significant decline in our standard of living, in the productive capacity of an economy. And then 2019, obviously, that was COVID, and you could see the peak. And then obviously 4 quarters later would have been January. That would have been the peak, decline in economic activity. 1980s, I wasn't around then, but you can see, and then 1989, and you can see right now the the black dotted line is the current situation we're in. And one of the criticisms I got in this chart was it actually hides the fact that really it's been about 10 years of decline. So it actually peaked in about basically 2016 or whatever, and we've actually been basically been flat. But I wanted to be fair, and the way I designed this chart, not to go on too much into the details, but basically as soon as it pipped back above zero, I cut the data off. And that's why you can see each of those little lines. As soon as it hits back above zero, I stopped it and restarted the calculation, quote unquote.
Okay, sounds good. It's a great chart. I mean, so if we go and we have another quarter of negative GDP like we just had, Canada would be in a technical recession. Is that correct?
Right. So you're talking about the most recent data print. So I'm actually going to do a video on the most recent data print in my Ice Cap Canadian market wrap. Forgive the plug. And actually, the funny, and I'm actually going to zag a little bit because I know the number was pretty horrible, and I get it, and fundamentally, it's really hard to sort of hide the fact that we declined 1.6%, annualized for the quarter. I mean, that's unambiguously sort of a bad number. But what I think that kind of hides is the fact that there was that most of that drawdown, that negative drag on our growth, came from two pieces, which is really exports, which was and then following from that was investment.
Okay, so
and
if you look at
consumer spending, if you look at government, and if you look at residential investment, all of those were positive. Even inventories were positive. And so just so people understand, so if you think, remember I mentioned there's 3 ways to calculate GDP. So the expenditure approach is the one that's most common, and that's basically government spending plus consumption plus investment plus net exports, and then an inventory component equals GDP. And actually, 4 out of the 5, or 5 out of the 6, whatever it is, they were all up, and the one that was down was exports, driven by the U.S. trade dispute, and investment, which is, I think, related to that trade dispute.
So if Carney doesn't get a deal, do you see the next quarter having the same sort of export issues, and then we continue to see GDP decline?
Yeah, so that's the $1 million question. I think
Question.
so. So remember that we're already almost done Q3, right? So remember that. So I know this sounds, sorry, forgive me if I'm being pedantic, but I think it's really important, right? Like Q1 is to March, Q2 is to June, and now we're already at the end, well, at the beginning of September. But so a lot of that data is already baked. So even if Mark Carney were to come out with the greatest deal in the history of the world, it's not clear that that would come up in Q3, right? Just because simply of the calendar. And the other thing is that I think it's really important to remember is why I'm a little bit more sort of positive on what otherwise would be a really shitty number. I mean, let's not like, let's not make, let's not color it. Let's not be too overly optimistic, which is because I think that it's the rate of change that I think people often look at. So and I think a lot of people when tariffs happen, I think it's, in my view, it's like a one-off shock that recalibrates people's decision making, and then it's not necessarily true that it would continue to decline, if that makes sense. So we'll see. I
Okay,
mean, who knows? I mean,
we'll
it's tough
see.
to predict the future, but I think that's an important factor.
Okay. Sounds good. So you were on your last episode of the Loonie Hour. Plug that down below. Critical of Carney so far.
Yeah,
Are you still
absolutely.
that? Is you
Yeah, I
still
am.
that
I
feeling?
think
Yeah.
there's a couple of things that I'm extremely critical about Carney. There's like the past and then the present. The past is his record as a central banker, which is spotty at best. The past is him basically devoting the last 10 years of his career to try to destroy the energy industry, Canada's most important export. And why do I use language like that? Because he was head of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and that whose stated aim was to starve oil and gas companies of capital, which is basically trying to legislate something through the back door. That's just a fact. I mean, he literally was the head of it
Yeah.
for many
Wrote a
years.
book on it too.
Yeah, he wrote in his book, he said that fossil fuels were, we needed to basically pivot away from that, destroy those industries, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's like my criticism of his past is, I think, absolutely well warranted. He's obviously an extremely accomplished person, better educated than I am, so I got to be careful about throwing stones and you live in a glass house, etc. But his record as a central banker, I think, is spotty. Just ask the British about that. Him being against fossil fuels, I think, is absolutely insane. And I will never, well, I shouldn't say never, but I have very, very difficult time forgiving somebody for doing that. Um, you know, but that's, again, park that. And then there's the present. There's his actions as the leader of the Liberal Party, and then as Prime Minister of Canada. I mean, I always thought the elbows up thing was a cynical ploy to get people to vote for him, and I was right.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
knew that as
100%.
soon as he was elected, that all of that rhetoric would melt away. It took a little bit longer than I was expecting, but we got there in the end. And because America is our and will be our main trading partner, we share a 4,000-kilometer unguarded border with them. We have an endless list of agreements, treaties, deals, whatever, from an economic perspective. Everything from pills to plugs, that's not going to change. Our militaries work inextricably together, whether it's NORAD, NATO. We share Coast Guard stuff. Obviously, our policing is integrated. And the idea that our relationship with them was, quote, over was, in my view, really, really unhelpful rhetoric that was designed very cynically to get people to vote for him. And it worked. let's give the guy credit. It was a calculated strategy that worked fantastically well. I mean, that there's no bones about it. And the idea that Canada is going to pivot away from America is a lie. That's just
Yeah.
from an economic standpoint, that's a lie. What matters with trade is proximity. Virtually every country, either that is close or like borders matter when it comes to trade, especially on land. Even less so maybe on sea. If you're an island, who knows? But proximity matters in trade. And in Canada's case, pipelines matter in trade. 77% of our exports, or 75% or whatever it is now, of our exports go to the US. The lion's share of that trade is via pipeline. So we ship them oil, and in return, we get hard currency, and then we use that hard currency to buy goods and services. And so the idea that we're going to pivot wholesale away from America was always a lie. And he and as a PhD in economics from Oxford, who was the central banker, was the governor of two central banks, he knew damn well that is a lie. And so the idea that Canada should try to find new markets, absolutely, that makes it very sensible. We should sell natural gas to Europe, maybe.
There's no business case.
Yeah, so the idea that we should work to better integrate our own market, absolutely. I think that's a brilliant idea. But the idea that Canada is going to pivot away from the United States, that our relationship with them is over, I think that's not as harmful rhetoric that was always a lie, and it was an effective one.
A chart for that.
Sure, I love charts. By the way,
we can tell. So Rich was talking about exports, imports. So here's a good chart. So a lot of the people who scream bloody murder to oil, whatever. So Canada's visible goods trade balance widened in Q2. This was driven by growing goods energy deficit. Exports of energy products fell slightly too. So you can see in Rich's chart here, I'm just going to make it bigger. So Canada sells here to pay for imports down here. So if you get rid of here, what happens to our imports?
Yeah, so I think this chart's really, really one of my favorite charts. And this one and another one called the current account balance, and then another one called the net exports one. So, and I think that what this chart tells you is the nature and structure of the Canadian economy. Not the way it will always be, not the way it has been, but the way it is right now. Or actually, it does tell you how it has been, actually, funnily enough, sorry. But you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying this is a permanent state of affairs. This is just where we are right now. And what this goods trade balance is, so people who don't know, it says in small print at the top there, is basically a trade balance, just exports minus imports. And to say that Canada sells oil to pay for imported goods is a bit of rhetoric on so mea culpa here. It's not to say that we don't export billions of other goods and services, chemicals, steel, accounting services, travel is an export and import. I mean, aero parts, motor vehicle parts. I mean, we do, of course we do. But what matters for inflation, for your currency, for flows of money, and the effects that has on on other types of policy and your current account balance, etc. What matters is the net number. And so what this chart shows you is it just cuts right to the chase. It cuts right through all the BS, and it highlights that we sell. Canada, the fourth largest producer of oil in the world. We produce about 5 million barrels of oil per day. We consume about 2.25, and that extra bit we sell to America and other countries, mostly America, other countries too. And that, in effect, allows us to fund the purchase of goods X energy products. And the reason I say fund is because countries that have if let's say you basically someone needs to pay for something somewhere, right? So if you run a massive current account or trade deficit, that needs to be funded. And that could either be funded via people borrowing, you borrowing money to do that, but eventually, you eventually someone needs to either pay down that debt, or you need to adjust your consumption, right? You cannot, like, just like having a credit card, you cannot just run up massive credit card balances every single month, event forever and ever and ever. And so what this chart shows you is that if we are going to stop selling oil, then that gray line that exports products, goods, X energy products, needs to then come back up. Or another way of saying it, because our goods X energy balance is so out of whack, and Canada has extremely high amounts of debt, and we have poor productivity growth, if we were to stop selling oil, the people who have been the foreigners who have been effectively funding this chart, basically funding this, would basically say, no, we don't trust you, in effect, right? I'm trying to put this in layman's terms. And but because we sell oil, that blue line is roughly in balance. If you look at our current account balance, it's the same thing. The current account balance just simply includes flows from financial stuff, so like dividends, interest payments, and earnings, etc. But anyway, so I'm going off on tangent here, but this chart is just such a powerful reminder of how right now our economy is organized. And so if you are without that constant inward flow of hard currency in order to fund our consumption, the launch of of consumption of goods comes from outside our borders, we would have to have some kind of readjustment. And that readjustment comes in two ways. It either comes from a much lower currency, right? Because people would not want to sell to us. So we would have to have people would not want to buy our debt. So they would sell our debt, which would pressure on the currency, et cetera. Which would effectively lead to higher inflation and affect consumption ultimately. Or we would have to have some kind of internal devaluation, meaning we would just have to stop consuming as much, both on the public side and on the private.
Okay. Yeah,
Did
that's
I
interesting.
screw that up, or
Yeah,
did that make
no,
sense?
no, it made a ton of sense. That was great. So with what Carney's doing right now, right? Like there's this kind of you see Danielle Smith come out and say we need more pipelines, and then you kind of have a Doug Ford pandering saying, yes, we would love a pipeline to go to Ontario instead of going down to Michigan. When I've looked at that chart, is a big reason these private companies don't want to invest in it is because of the uncertainty from the previous Trudeau era of policy, like, the carbon tax, Bill C-69, no new more pipelines that haven't been removed, and no tanker ban. The tanker ban that is implemented. Are these things scaring off investment in Canada? Because I see a lot of charts saying that money is leaving the country. Is it this policy of kind of environmentalism stopping us from increasing those exports?
Yeah, so I think it's never just one thing. I'm of the view, I really hate like sort of reductive reasoning. I mean, sometimes it's just one thing, but most of the time, it's never just one thing. But I want to give Carney credit here. I think one of the things that annoys me about him, and at the same time, I have to applaud him, is that he's basically disavowed everything that he has fought for. And so when hiring somebody with as much experience in the energy sector as Tim Hodgson as his energy minister, that is a good thing. That is like an indication that that they want to pivot towards exploiting Canada's oil and gas resources by saying things that, by saying we're going to build pipelines and that Canada's going to become an energy superpower. You have to give the guy credit. I've been when it's due. Like, I've been extremely critical of the guy. I think rightly so. But at the same time, it would be intellectually dishonest of me to not give the guy credit and say, okay, so they've clearly made some changes in how they think Canada's economy should go forward, and we have to applaud them, for it. I mean, now, has there been any action to meet that talk? Not yet, but I mean, it's still early days, and so it would be unfair. I still hold out hope. What was the other part of the question? The
I,
flows, the
the
flows. And like,
flows. Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think, and then with respect to whether or not people will invest in Canada in the oil and gas sector, I think that it's a bunch of things all sort of happening at the same time and all contributing to the lack of investment in that space. So one of the things that I think people sort of often overlook or don't think about was the 2017 Trump tax cut. Corporate taxes in America were much, much higher, I think 39% in 2016-17 versus Canada's 26%. This includes, it's like a harmonized, let's say, corporate tax rate in Canada. In 2017, at the end of 2016, early 2017, Trump did his Corporate Jobs and Tax Cut Act or whatever, some stupid name, which dropped the US's corporate tax rate to basically in line, if not below or slightly above, I can't remember, with Canada's. You know what I mean? And so before, if you're an American, you would put up with all kinds of dumb regulations if you knew you were getting 13% or more of your profits back. Or Canadian businesses too. We'd invest in Canada because, well, it's annoying and slow and whatever, but at least we're getting more money at the end of the day. So all of a sudden we lost that arbitrage. Then the second in the long list of reasons why people are not investing in Canada is, to be honest with you, the price of oil affects that. If you plot the price of oil with the nominal amount of investment in the oil and gas sector, it obviously correlates. If the oil price goes down, people invest less. Price goes up, people invest more. That's true for all commodities, not just oil. So that's part of it. However, since 2015 or 2016, oil prices have gone up, and we haven't seen investment rebound. And that brings us to our sort of the third pillar, which is, and then that's split in two pieces. One is the bully pulpit. Justin Trudeau and the rest of his, liberal, let's just call it that, Liberal Party, have spent the last 10 years vilifying that industry, which is completely bananas. And then they've put in legislation that has actively hurt the incentive to invest in industry. They've reworked the Impact Assessment Act, Bill C-69, which was I think the pipeline, the tanker ban stuff. Then they changed legislation on whether or not you could talk about how natural gas produces less emissions than coal. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. From a political, rhetorical, from the rhetoric standpoint, they just would not stop attacking the oil and gas industry. And from a legislative standpoint, their record is very clear.
Yeah, yeah. Are you optimistic that Carney isn't just all talk? Are you optimistic that there could be some projects that are going to happen? Because we do know that minority governments usually don't last too long. So my thought was that when he was saying, we're going to take bold, fast action, we would be further ahead than we are today. I know these things take time, but it seems like he's opening up an office to front run these projects. But it's like, what do you need an office for? Don't you just have the federal?
The real thing they should just do is repeal the legislation that they've put in. That's just the bottom line. I mean, whether or not they will do that, I don't think they will, because it'll just give Pierre Poilievre and the opposition just too much of an obvious win. So they're going to turn themselves into a pretzel to effectively do the same thing. So that's what Bill C-5 is about. It's basically allowing them to pick and choose when oil companies are basically allowed to break the previous legislation rules. I mean, I'm being very glib with my analysis, but that's sort of my view. Do I think that he will? Do I think that he'll do the right thing by Canadians? I genuinely think he will. I think he wants to be seen as this. He wants to succeed. I don't doubt. I don't think Carney wakes up in the morning and thinks, I want to fail. I think he wants to succeed. I think he wants a majority government. I think he wants Canada to do well. And I think he knows deep down inside, not even that deep, I think he knows inside that Canada is a petro state. And without oil, we would be fucked. And that is the reality of the situation. I also think what's important to note is that there's a geopolitical element to this that is becoming increasingly obvious, which is, China controls 90% of the rare earth metals, critical material. I always get that screwed up. They control the lion's share of the mining and processing and distribution of a whole suite of metals and non-metal minerals that are critical for having this conversation on the internet. Semiconductors, building EVs, all kinds of stuff. And Europe and America understand that this is a major strategic vulnerability. And guess which country has virtually every one of these metals and minerals, in spades, and it's Canada. And so, I think that, a couple of years ago, NATO showed up on Canada's doorstep and said, knock, knock, you need to start opening up mines. I think the more the world bifurcates between China and the US, I think that becomes increasingly obvious that that's true. Europe, whether they like it or not, is in that Western sphere and has none of and needs to buy these natural resources, and they want to do it from an ally and a steady supply chain, and somebody who's not a strategic adversary. That's Canada, and I think that Mark Carney, he's absolutely aware of that, and I think that that's why you have things like Bill C-5. I think that that's why increasingly you will see that the people who the keep it in the ground crowd will increasingly be sidelined, and the people in Canada who want to ethically and sustainably exploit our natural resources will be elevated.
Okay. That's a good answer. All right, next one here. This one actually isn't from you, but you've been very critical of population growth, which I like. So this is from Riley. It's not that I like it. It's just it was such an obvious thing in hindsight. Like I was critical of it. Yeah, I was critical of it. It made no sense to me. So Canada's population growth nosedive as immigration restrictions takes effect. Bad news for developers, speculators, cheap labor employers, immigration consultants, and diploma mills. Good news for Canadians, which I think is very true. You can see on this chart, it comes down. Now, what the Globe and Mail and stuff like to show and say is that Poilievre is still, screaming that, population is already declining. Shut up, Poilievre. But the issue is that although the house was on fire, but now the fire's out, the house is still damaged. Is that an analogy that makes sense?
Absolutely. I think the population growth thing is the single greatest policy mistake, misstep, accident, whatever you want to call it. Some people say it's on purpose. I don't believe that. In the last 100 years, I think people underappreciate how big of a screw up it really is. I show a chart that has population growth from 1980 until now. And from 1980 to 2015, population of Canada, including births, deaths, and immigration, was 319,000 per year. In the last 3 years, it averaged 919,000 per year. So you've tripled population growth exclusively via immigration. And the problem with that is extreme. Like there's loads of problems with that, but it was low wage, low skilled labor. And people might not like that language, but that's a fact. And so what that did was, let's leave aside the social cohesion aspect. Let's just, because I think that's a whole conversation. But what you basically did is you flooded a labor market with young, unskilled laborers. And the impacts of that are felt all over the place. And the fact that it's now, quote unquote, gone away, I mean, is frankly irrelevant. I mean, we are going to be dealing with this overhang for the next 10, 15 years. You cannot triple population growth and have that be the run rate. Like it wasn't just triple. You didn't just triple it for 1 year and say, "Oops, we screwed up." You tripled the growth rate, and then that run rate went for 3 or 4 years. That's an insane policy. I'm an economist. I'm a fundamental macroeconomist. That is an insane thing to do. Why is it insane? It hurts the people on the lower socioeconomic class the most. If you're rich, if you own a house, if you're old, it doesn't affect you. If you're young, if you're trying to get into the labor market, if you're renting, it absolutely affects you. What do immigrants do, for better or for worse? They go to a country, they rent, they don't buy. If you're uneducated, if you're low skilled, low wage, what do? You're competing against the incumbent for low skilled, low wage jobs. What does that do? It drives down wages. So it was like it was a transfer of wealth from the young, working class, uneducated people to the old homeowner, asset holder, and corporations. Like, it is insane that they thought that was a good idea. Not to mention, because these people, the vast majority of them, are low skilled, low wage workers, it hurts our productivity growth. Right. So
Yeah.
and
Right.
like, how does it hurt our productivity growth? They literally are not productive. They're not contributing more than they're taking away from the economy. I'm sorry, with all due respect, if you have a high school education from some country, until you come here, get educated, and then start contributing. So there might be a 3, 5, 10-year window where you're not really extremely productive. In fact, I would argue you might be less productive than the incumbent.
Yeah.
Not to mention, then there's a thing called the labor substitution effect. I mean, this is something, now we're getting really into the weeds, but if you're a giant corporation and you have and if you're faced with higher wages, you're forced to become more productive. You're forced to invest more in your labor force. You're forced to buy more you're forced to automate more, invest capex in better processes or better software or whatever. If you all of a sudden have a flood of cheap labor, you're not going to do that. And as evidenced by the lack of capital expenditure, we know that corporations have pivoted towards that part of the labor force. Like, in their earnings calls, they say it. We were going to invest in this new process, but now wages are really cheap, and we're going to change. So like, the list of ways that this has screwed up Canada is long and easy to evidence and well documented. And I think what's really important to note, and again, as the child of an two immigrants who had no education when they came to Canada, the issue is not whether or not immigration is good or bad. The issue is the quantum. It's the dose that makes the poison. Had the Liberal Party increased immigration from 300,000 to 400 or 500,000, which would have been a 40% increase or 60% increase, I don't think we would not be having this conversation right now.
Yeah.
And anybody who would have been critical of immigration, we should have been rightly vilified as some kind of jingoistic xenophobe. They tripled the number, and they kept that run rate for years, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, or 4 years, whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's insane, right? From like that, just like, I don't know, I can't go on. I cannot stress this enough. Like, not only did they triple the number, they kept that number running high. So it would have been one thing to increase immigration and say, we think Canada's getting old. We want to, we feel that this is a good way of buttressing our economy for the fact that our Canada's aging or whatever. So and we want to increase immigration. Fine. That's not an unreasonable view. But to triple the population growth, 95% of which is immigration, was a completely insane and reckless policy. There's a second piece to that. They changed the rules on how you can immigrate. So we used to be a high wage, high skilled immigration country. And the reason for 25 or 40 years no one gave a shit about immigration in this country was because you had a situation where low skilled, low wage workers did not feel that immigrants were a threat to them. And in fact, they weren't. If you're a doctor from Iran or an engineer from South Korea, or a PhD candidate from Brazil, you come to Canada and you get a job, you're not competing with some kid who's working at Tim Hortons. In fact, if anything, what that does is actually keeps the wages at the high end of your socioeconomic ladder low or under pressure. And it actually allows the low wage worker, low skilled, low education worker there's competition among those people actually pushes up the wages of that low end of the socioeconomic scale.
Yeah.
That's genius. What they did was the total fucking opposite.
Yeah.
So you have a situation where we're basically inviting literally millions of low-skilled, low-wage workers to all compete, while high-end workers and high-wage and rich people, basically rich people, and on the high end of the socioeconomic ladder, don't have any competition. Insane. That is like, you could not have designed a more catastrophic immigration policy if you had tried. And so, like, I mean, I'm sorry I'm going on and on about this, but
That rant was epic. It was so
sorry.
good.
I mean,
But
it's just true. I
it's
mean,
just people they're not seeing what's going on. Like even today, Pierre Poilievre comes out and says we need to abolish the temporary foreign worker program. And I don't think you need to abolish it. I think you need to get rid of it and then restart it and make it okay. We need to legitimize this because clearly it's being taken advantage of by the people that everyone hates, which is big corporations. Like Tim Hortons cannot say they are this big national Canadian company that believe in Canadians when they're employing cheaper labor to increase their margins. Like it doesn't make sense.
It just makes me so sad because as the child of two penniless, uneducated immigrants, it makes me sad that now, for the first time in what, 3, 4 generations, there is now anti-immigration sentiment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can tell you that was that is a direct result, not of Canadians being unwelcome or racist. No, that is a direct result of shit policy and the refusal to acknowledge it until basically they were going to get kicked out of office. And again, let me stress this. Had the immigration been high skilled, high wage, highly educated people, you would not have this anti immigration sentiment. No one cares if a freaking doctor from Uzbekistan goes to McGill to do a residence. People care if you're flooding the market of people working at Tim Hortons. It's insane. And that's just the reality. And it has like all kinds of knock-on effects. Rents were skyrocketed because of it. You know, people who don't have places to live. I mean, again, leaving aside the sociology stuff, the social stuff, just like purely on academic. And then the other thing I think that's really crazy is like, and there's a guy, Michael Scudderud, who's a professor of Waterloo, who's done a lot of work on this. And, you know, and in many ways, I guess I've ripped off a lot of his arguments. So I would suggest you guys give that guy a follow on Twitter. But it's totally mad. It's totally mad that they did this. And the only people who benefited from this are the Tim Hortons of the world and the McDonald's of the world. And we can see, and it's going to take us 10 years to work through this. And whether or not, and the other thing people say, the temporary foreign worker program. I mean, youth unemployment is at a 25-year high.
Yeah,
You
it's
know,
like it's over 14% in
yeah, I mean,
Ontario by itself. Yeah, it's ridiculous. These kids, in high school or in university are just trying to get a job, and they are, although they're getting educated, they're still low skill. They still don't have a lot of education. They need to start somewhere.
yeah, of course.
I've heard people giving out 200 resumes and none of them get a call back.
Yeah,
To
I
a
mean, it's
grocery
crazy.
store,
Like
Tim
we should. I
Hortons,
mean, the idea
nothing.
that Tim Hortons is hiring any like, not to pick on Tim Hortons because there's a bunch of other companies who are doing this. It's bullshit. And like, of course, what drives me really crazy is that like people like Professor Michael Scudderud, I can't say his last name, sorry, I butcher it, but from Waterloo, who's been studying labor economics for 35 years or whatever. He warned the Liberal Party about this in 2014 and 15. They asked him, he told them, they ignored it, and then now everybody's wondering what happened. No. This was well understood. People knew exactly this was going to happen. It happened the way people thought it would, and now everybody's wondering why youth or everybody under 40 doesn't want immigration, which is to me the real like when we look back on this time, I think there's scarring. There'll be some real scarring around immigration that I think you can't undo. And it's really sad. I mean, ultimately, that's what's the really screwed up part about this whole thing.
I believe that our generation and the generation below us will be scarred from mass immigration,
For
and
sure.
the boomers whose house prices are up $1 million, and the pensions are full and they're getting paid. They don't see it the way we see it, but if they could just put themselves in our shoes, or even people younger than us, for 5 minutes, they would
People never do
also
that though,
be.
Cortez.
I
People
know it's
never put their
crazy. Yeah, it'll never happen. I don't even know why.
people never
I'm
put
living.
themselves in other people's shoes. I mean,
Yeah,
the boomers are still worried about Donald Trump invading Canada. I mean, how ridiculous is that? I
yeah.
mean, it's
They wouldn't even have to shoot a gun. They could come in here and take us
joke,
over
man.
in
It's a
one day. It would
joke.
take.
Why buy the cow when you get the milk for free?
It's crazy. Why buy the cow when you get the milk for
What are we
free?
doing here? It's like, you know, I'm really again, I'm very proudly the son of immigrants. My parents really did live the immigrant dream. They came here with nothing. They bought into what it means to be Canadian. They are fiercely and proudly Canadian. My father died many years ago. My mother is still alive. My mother's Canadian to her core and her bones. And, you know, what they did was screw up an ultimately what was an extremely good immigration system. The beauty about the internet is that it's forever until until we have until
AI
Skynet and
takes over.
Terminator One comes in.
Yeah.
But if you just go Google Canada immigration system 2015, and you'll see there's like hundreds of articles, if not thousands of articles, about how our immigration system was the envy of the world. And these fuckers went and cocked it up. And so when Pierre Poilievre says we need to turf the temporary worker program, I think it's a bit extreme, but I get it. We need to reset it completely.
Yeah,
And the
reset it.
fact
Yeah,
that
because
the Globe and Mail is running cover for the Liberal Party again should surprise absolutely zero people.
I know that the conservative. I think Stephen Harper was a part of bringing the temporary foreign worker program in, but it was under his government, it was a lot different than it is today. Obviously, you have policy, it works, and then when it stops working, you have to go back and fix it. So to the people that's saying, "Oh, it's Stephen Harper's fault," like, come on, are we still blaming Harper? It's been so
No, no.
long. Like, you can't even do it.
If you go to my Twitter and you find go click on replies, you'll see a couple. You'll see the chart is so outrageous that no sensible person can argue that
Yeah.
this was not is the biggest colossal fuck up ever. Like I'm sorry, pardon my French, but just like it is just absolutely bananas.
No,
And
and
again,
it didn't just affect jobs. It affect housing,
of
and
course it did.
a lot of people come to this podcast to talk about housing too, and I talk about housing, and I am the one saying that housing prices are going to fall if we see a decline in immigration. Not just that, we see more listings coming to the market. We haven't seen it like this, and investor appetite has left the building for good reason. Prices are too high, and because immigration has come down, I'm not blaming immigrants. Because immigration has come down, rents have come down. So
Of
when
course
you
it
run
has.
the performas, you run the numbers. The only thing people wanted to invest in for the last 5 years in Canada was to, let's take money out of my primary residence that's shot up in value and go do this again and take on leverage. There's a saying, Charlie Munger says it, how do you get into trouble? Liquors, ladies, and leverage. And that's what we're seeing. That's what we're
I've
seeing
never heard that
today.
before.
Yeah, it's a good
I
one.
mean, listen, I can't blame. It's not the immigrants' fault. If you're in India, of course,
No.
or whatever, it's not their fault.
Of
It's
course you
ridiculous.
want to come to Canada. Yeah, you want to live the dream.
But the point is like it was a seller's market, and we screwed up. And honestly, I'll never forgive this group of MPs who were in charge of that and then gaslit everybody, especially people like me and Michael Scritterud, this guy who I recommend, who's done so much work on it for years. This is not Monday morning quarterbacking. This is like people who knew that it was a fuck up, said it was a fuck up, were ignored, and now everybody's like, oh, we didn't know, blah blah blah. And what's really important to understand is like, though that is such a powerful lever. When you're thinking about economics, you're thinking about drivers of growth. It's a really super powerful lever, and to mess with that the way they did is going to take 15 years to fix.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's gonna be a long, long time. And when I kind of look at the charts from the '90s and I see those house prices and it, for a lot of people, because this is housing, that's where I see the market going. And I know everyone, oh, it's fun to be a bear, and I was like, I just don't see the bull case anymore. So I'm just gonna be
I mean,
realistic in my thing.
that's an interesting thing. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but every quarter the Bank of Canada produces something called the Monetary Policy Report. And in Q2, I think, of 2024, they did a whole sort of section on housing. And they talked about the drivers of housing, and naturally, population growth, or the way they call it, actually household growth, right? You take the number of, because it's not just population growth, like there's 2.3 people to every house or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And so it's called like a housing demand, which is, the number of people coming minus the number of people dying, whatever, and then whatever divided by the number of average number of people per households. And then you have housing supply, which is, clearly the number of housing being built. Then, minus the number that are destroyed or whatever. I guess that's small, but, and then, and the gap had widened substantially, right? Like massively. We all know this. It was a ridiculous thing that happened. And then, but what's also really interesting was there was other things that the Bank of Canada outlined, which is things like zoning, cheap money, what's it called, approvals, and the rate at which and the speed at which housing is approved. And so I agree to some degree that the rate of change will slow with the rate of change of immigration falling. But the argument that housing countrywide will just fall off a cliff, I think we need to be more nuanced than that. Like, I think
Yeah,
single family versus condos, single family versus condos is a big,
big difference.
big difference. I think
If you
where
if you
you
look at
are, like
where you
if
are,
you have
yeah.
a single family house in downtown Toronto, I don't know. It's not clear that house price is going to fall 25 or 30%. I don't know.
Yeah,
This is your space. I'm just thinking
yeah,
from
yeah.
like a
No, you're totally right. For me, sometimes I get kind of caught up in my own market. But it is true. If you look at other provinces, they're Alberta's building more homes than Ontario, and we have a way bigger population. Just as an example.
mm,
But if you go to Alberta, you're going to be able to buy a house a lot cheaper than you are in Toronto. And, if you look at other provinces as well. So I think where I'm kind of, my head's at, where I think I see more pain that the media will pick up on, and people, it will be British Columbia and it will be Ontario, kind of like more these suburbs that blew up during COVID. Like, we are starting to see prices come down to, 2021 levels in some pockets. So for me, it's just something to look at. But you are seeing increases in some of these other provinces. I don't know if it's because people are fleeing there because they have remote work, or they want to set up their life somewhere where they can have kids and actually live that Canadian dream with a backyard, because it's quite unattainable in Toronto. What I always think about is who are you going to sell this house to next? That's what I'm always trying to think about. Unless incomes really start appreciating, who are you going to sell this $1.5 million townhouse to that you just bought today to next? That's my kind of underlying question. I don't really know, because we're not seeing these boomers want to sell their home and downsize anymore unless they're forced to go into a home,
yeah.
because the delta isn't there where they're like going to put, so much money in their bank account and all the hassle of moving like maybe we did once see. But
Yeah, I mean, I wonder. The other thing I think I mean, me, the other thing I often sort of screw up is, rates of change versus the level. And so, like, because the chart that I look at, which is from the Canadian Real Estate CREA, is that what it's called?
Korea,
Canadian.
yeah, you got it.
Yeah. So I mean, I understand that's like very superficial analysis. To be honest with you, housing is not my forte. And so forgive me if I've screwed this up, but like, we're basically only back to 2021 levels. And so what about the previous 20 years of like massive unsustainable growth? Do you know what I mean? And so like
Yeah,
everybody's like, oh, house prices have fallen, house prices have fallen. And then you go look at the chart, you're like, well, 2021 was not affordable.
yeah, it still
And
wasn't
you know what
affordable.
I
Yeah,
mean? And like wages have not skyrocketed. And yeah, wages are up, but inflation's way up. So
way
I
up.
don't feel wealthier than I did in 2021. Do you know what I mean? And so that's the part where I find the rate of change versus the level tells you kind of a much different story.
Yeah,
And so,
you're not
like,
wrong.
is housing affordable in Canada? I would submit to you, no, it's not at
No,
all
not at
affordable.
all.
Even though
Yeah,
we've
yeah,
had 2 or 3 years of decline, we're still at
we're still like
2021
crazy.
levels, and
Yeah.
2021 was not affordable. So
There's a
that's
lot of areas that are down, like where I am in Ontario. They're down 20%, like hundreds of thousands of dollars from the
oh
peak of the
shoot,
market.
okay,
Yeah. Yeah. So when you look at that metric, like I've helped people where
yeah.
they bought for about 200,000 more than they ended up selling for. Like they've taken that loss. And I
Man.
didn't help them buy. So let me preface that. I didn't help them buy.
Of course
They
not. Of
just,
course not.
yeah, they just came to me because they wanted to sell.
But what do those people do? Like, I mean, that must be a devastating. I mean, $200,000 is a lot of money for the vast majority of people in this country. That could destroy a family. No,
100%. 100%. They just
were they for like
some
how long? How just sorry, just a really quick question. How long did it take for them to go from like denial to acceptance? $200,000 less? No, 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 no. The market, they're going to cut interest rates. The market's going to recover to like. Does it take a year, 6 months? I mean, how does it?
I think it takes probably about, I would guesstimate about a year and a half. Like I remember
Wow.
walking into the listing appointment, knowing what they paid for it, and just like kind of like giving that awkward like, so do you know I cannot get you that number that you paid for it? And they're just like, yes, we know. Like they're just
Holy
like,
shit.
we get it. We've seen what's been going on in our area. We know that the number we paid, we are going to be walking away. A big reason why was because um, during COVID, people flocked to these suburbs thinking that the cities were dead and they could work remote. And then they ended up hating the suburb they moved to and hating their life because of the commute they had to do back to work.
Yeah.
So they were willing, they said, at this point, our relationship is more important than the $200,000.
Right. I mean,
So,
that makes
yeah,
total sense.
by the time they sell, maybe, and then they went and they would buy something like a condo or something that would have been less overall, but they would just take on more debt, pay the CMHC premium on the mortgage. This
Yeah.
is I didn't help them do the mortgage, so I'm not
No,
a
no, I
mortgage broker.
understand.
This is just kind of what I heard them doing because I was interested.
So
But
can I ask
yeah,
another question? Like, do
yeah,
you
of
think
course,
that in like, the again, forgive my ignorance in this space, but like the Bramptons of the world that
yeah,
have seen 30% declines. Do you think that there's more pain to come in those places? Because these are single
yes,
family homes in the suburbs that I'm seeing. I mean, I know Twitter is not exactly a representative sample. I get it, but I'm seeing 25% decline. I mean, do you think there's more pain in those spaces?
yeah, I do. I think that incomes have just not kept up with prices, and I think people's appetite for and everyone wants to tell me that I'm wrong. I understand. You can. All these realtors. I was out for dinner with a bunch of realtors. They said by next spring it'll be better, right? And I was like, no. And like Foch was there, who's smarter than me. So I was like,
He's great.
ask him,
I have a lot of
ask him.
respect for him.
Yeah, and he thinks quite along the same lines of as me. And I'm not just
Well,
trying
you're
to
in
do it
good
to get
company
clicks.
because he's a smart guy.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not just doing it to get clicks or likes or whatever.
No,
It's
no.
just it's my honest belief is that the appetite for real estate isn't there. And this is more anecdotal, but I used to get my showing volumes on the houses that I have for sale right now are down substantially. Like if I get a showing a week on some of these properties, like I'm excited just to
So can
have
I
a
ask you another
conversation with my
question then?
seller. Yeah, shoot.
So I'm of the view that, again, I'm front running my Loonie hour today.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
of the view that the Bank of Canada will cut interest rates, even though I think it's a stupid idea and they shouldn't because of negative real interest rates, which maybe is a subject we'll keep to the next time. Basically, they're going to cut the short term rate lower than core inflation is. So I think that's a terrible idea, which is partly how we got into this mess in the first place. But anyway, do you think like another 50 basis points of cutting will reinvigorate these markets, or do you think that like the psychological damage is done?
I think it depends where they cut it to. Like I don't see rates going below 3% for the next 3 years. Like maybe I'm a bit crazy,
You
but
mean
I just
mortgage
don't.
rates? You mean mortgage rates? Because the
Yeah, like
short-term rate's
mortgage
already
rates.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So like for you to get a fixed rate mortgage or a variable rate mortgage, I don't see it going below 3 because I just don't think they can reinvigorate inflation. Like, I think they must have learned their lesson. Not just
I can tell you,
I know.
people do not learn their lessons.
I know. I really hope Carolyn Rogers, your crush,
I love her.
will stop it.
Yeah.
But I just don't think that I just don't think they can even the housing market. Like, there's no way that they can sit there and say that they didn't have some sort of role in locking Canadians.
Of course they did. It's
locking Canadians out of home ownership by
he literally
dropping
said
rates
interest
zero.
rates were going to be low for a very long time. I quote. That's a quote.
So this is what I'm looking at. We have population decline. We have people needing to renew their mortgages, because remember, everyone who got a mortgage in 2021, that renewal wall will come to fruition. Mm-hmm. You have, like, I'm showing condos right now to some buyers in Toronto. Every condo I show had a tenant in it. It's now vacant. No one's in there, so the carrying costs are piling up. Though the tenants left, and now the seller is trying to sell this condo and mitigate their losses, but no one's buying, and they don't want to re-rent it because the rent has dropped so much that they're negative cash flow every single month. Sugar. So they're trying to offload these condos, and every day I'm seeing more come on. Now everyone's saying the fall market's going to be better, and sales are ticking up. And why are sales ticking up? Because prices are coming down, so more people can afford them. It's very simple. Yeah. So until that, this is just
just one more question.
Sorry,
So one more question. But just those rates, like, you fundamentally, you just think the market's broken. There needs to be a new bid. The new bid's way lower, and it doesn't really matter what happens with interest rates. Basically, short of going to zero. I mean,
yeah, I think investors are trying to deleverage. They're trying to unload, and then you have the young people who I speak to, who say, why would I buy when I could rent for $2,500 versus paying $4,000 a month, plus the opportunity cost of putting 20% down? Where's that money going to come from? So, and until we get rent and mortgage payments, at least a close enough delta where you go, hey, I'd like to own it now. Because right now the delta's not even close.
Interesting.
But then you also have declining rents. So you have these, you have this
chasing
like
a
crazy
falling knife. I mean, they're chasing a falling knife.
I think so. Yeah, and I tell people, I had a buddy text me, should I buy a house? I've been waiting for so long. I said, I'm of the opinion that I think prices are going to fall further. Could I be wrong? Yes, I don't have a crystal ball. So if you feel like you are going to buy a house today, you feel secure, you feel happy with the rate, the payment, and you are going to be there for a minimum of 5 years, then I would say you should go into the housing market. But I still am of the belief, like, don't come to me in 2 years and say that my house has fallen in price. And I told you, I think it might fall, but I could be wrong, because predictions suck. It is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's the thing. I think a lot of people, like in my business, you just need to be able to change your mind. I'm very confident about lots of the views that I hold. You just have to learn to change your mind. I mean, that's not to say you change your mind, like you change your underwear. That's not good either. But yeah, I mean, that's I think for me, I think the thing is that often people forget about in markets is that there's like a psychological factor that no one really ever wants to sort of admit. And the thing, if you look at 2008 and 9 in the U.S. market, I mean, even though somehow, I mean, there were housing markets that were down 30, 40, 50%. And you couldn't give those houses away, even though really that was actually a great time to buy.
It was a great time to buy. I know, I hate his famous last words,
and
but
that's a psychological thing, right? You're seeing it all cave in around you.
Chaos.
It takes some serious testicular fortitude
to hop in there.
To hop in. But what it also means is that there's probably much more pain to come, because what you're telling me is everyone's trying to exit at the same time.
I don't want to speak to every single market across Canada because I can't. Sorry, but this is generally in even I win in Clarkson. It's like a suburb of the GTA, and I was showing detached homes, detached semis to these new buyers of mine, all vacant. All these homes are vacant.
Wow, crazy.
And the way I know is because I open up the fridge every time. First off, I see the staging and I go, okay, this looks like this doesn't look like somebody lives here. And then you can't survive without food. So I open
Yeah.
up the fridge and then I start to go, geez, like,
That's funny. I never
I
thought about that. I
yeah,
never
yeah.
thought
So
of like, of course, the staging. Of course, that makes
yeah, the
total sense.
staging gets you,
But
but then yeah, you look in the fridge and you go, okay, nothing's in here. There's no way, like, unless they order Uber Eats every day. But
I know you're supposed to be interviewing me, but I have one more question just because I
yeah.
don't know anything about this market. How is the credit? How are the credit conditions? So, like, when you go to a bank, I saw this amazing chart today showing that like the net new originations or mortgages is negative and falling. Again, that's a rate of change. It was still probably debts are very high relative to GDP in Canada for housing. Um, but like, how's when you go to a bank and say, hey, this is the guy, this is the girl, they want to buy this house. Are banks amenable? Are they still, falling over themselves to lend you money, or have they pulled back on their credit conditions?
So I would say that credit conditions are very poor in the B lender space.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is like that is where you're seeing the most delinquencies and power of sales is from B lenders. So Canadians who had money, wanted yield, but didn't want to buy real estate. So essentially
Got
you
it.
lend money to people who have a good loan to value on their home. So say 80-20, 70-30. So there's some equity there if you do have to take the house over. But they can't get a mortgage with the bank. So you lend them, they pay you pure interest for a year. Usually it's like a year term, but it's all interest. You're getting 10, 12, 14% in some
Okay.
cases because they're
Yikes.
not paying any principal down. It's more of just like a short-term loan
Yeah.
until they can get.
It's a speculative thing.
Yeah, exactly. But to get a mortgage with the bank, I can tell you it's very hard. Like if you are not
Yeah,
bringing
but
in a lot
very
of
hard
money,
because you have like
but
those fake income things.
yeah, that's the caveat is that it is very easy to fake and change your income. Like you look at what you get and you send them, right? It just needs to change. Hey, Cortez makes 75,000. Now he makes 120. It's very simple. And one trick that they could do that I'm sure you're aware of is just get the CRA to verify that actually works. But
Canada
I
is
think
a
it's
haven
a
for white collar crime, and they're
a
not
hundred
interested
percent, a
in
hundred
playing.
percent. So there's a lot of risk in that as well. I think.
That's it.
I think
Because
it's going
you
to be an
see the
interesting
delinquency
5 years.
numbers for Canada, and they're in the low knots, right? It's 0.4, 0.5%, not 6%, like you might see in the US delinquency rates, or but 0.6 or 0.4%. So I always marvel at how low those delinquent. They're rising quite a bit now for a place like Toronto, but still super low. Relative to American banks, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm always really impressed by that.
Yeah, yeah, it's not easy. Like I incorporated a couple years ago. So basically, I have a corporation with my real estate company, and I pay myself a salary from the corporation, so I mitigate my taxes. A lot of realtors do it,
Yeah. Okay.
and yeah, once I switched, the bank was very, very hard on me
Yeah.
because they look at these ratios that they have, right? They, sometimes they look at the assets that you have. I'm not a mortgage broker, so I'm not going to like spew, but they are very hard. If you're telling the truth, it can be very challenging for a lot of people to even get a mortgage. Like I don't even
Crazy.
think young people would even for a second, this is nuts. I'll just go rent, like this is
What's
just too.
amazing if you look at so there's different ways that people like me consider valuations of homes. And I think, when I say things like, oh, Canada's market's overvalued, that's not my word for it. That's the data, and I'll tell you guys and share with that in a second, is very clear. And so one website that I really like is called Demographia, and you can Google that. And they have house price to income ratios. So median house price to median household income, and they have like 95 cities. Really cool. So they've got like cities in New Zealand, cities in Australia, cities in the US. I think they have like Hong Kong, Canada, obviously, and I can't remember. Or maybe another couple of cities. And what's amazing is they do it by like city. And so you got like Buffalo, New York, Ottawa, Gatineau. You'll have Winnipeg, whatever, like Miami Beach or whatever it is. And you can see that Canada, so Toronto and Vancouver have, house price to median income ratios in the tens, 11,
Mhm.
12, or whatever.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
there's
yeah.
places like Montreal where it's like 4 and 5,
Yeah.
and then you have places like Winnipeg where it's like 4 or whatever. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then there's other ways of looking at that, and it's like the OECD, which is an organization of economic cooperation and development, whatever. It's like it's an organization of 38 rich countries. Every country you could possibly think of, minus China's not in there. And they have a very good data set that goes back from I want to say 1980s, 1970s. And again, it's house price to income ratio, and they also have house price to rent. And so when you look at those, I mean, Canada is obviously very, very high, meaning the house prices relative to the rents are very, very high. And now that we're in a new psychological break, I think people are realizing, wait a second, I can just rent this big, beautiful house. And if I'm not going to get any capital appreciation, and mortgage rates are going to stay relatively high, it sort of makes sense. And I think it's very healthy. I think the word that's never used when you read on CBC or CTV or Gold Mail is that this is a healthy correction. What we're
For
seeing now,
sure.
it's a long time coming,
Very
and that's
overdue.
why I think that's why when Bank of Canada cuts interest rates next week or whatever, I can't remember what the date is. I'm just going to be
I think
annoyed
it's the
because
same day as the Fed. I think the Fed is
is
the
it? Oh,
17th.
that would
Yeah,
be
I think it's
fun.
I think it's going to be a big day
Yeah, it'd be fun.
for North
But yeah,
America.
it's like I think it's a healthy correction. I think it's a healthy thing. Now, it's impossible for politicians to run on the ticket that they want house prices to fall, right? So that's the joke.
100%.
Like,
Especially
well,
their boomer
of
population. They don't
course.
want
I
to
mean,
say
and
that,
also,
yeah.
and you know what? Listen, it's our fault too. No one's ever going to vote for a guy or a girl who says we want house prices to
It's prices
fall.
to fall. Yeah.
No one's going to vote for them. But and so we deserve a lot of blame, but that's what it means if housing is going to be more affordable in Canada. House prices need to fall significantly relative to income, and there's no like bullshit around it. Like that is the only way that housing becomes more affordable. Not building
100%.
5,000 more
Five.
units is
Yeah,
total
we're going to
bullshit.
double the production of home building. But
It's
if you
just
doubled the
bullshit.
even if you doubled it, house prices would come down because buyers would have more choice. So
But it's
you can't
bullshit.
simultaneously make housing affordable and prices stay the same or go up.
The
It
housing
doesn't work. I'm
supply
sorry.
has been the same for decades. Now, you could argue that the housing mix within that supply should change. So, in the 2000s, Canada built more single family homes than they did apartments, believe it or not, which is
Interesting.
crazy. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure I've published that chart before, which is wild. Think about how crazy that is. They built more single family homes than they did condos or apartments. Are we ever going to get to that again? No, definitely not. But at least you could in- improve the mix, where they start building more single family homes
Or even just row
relative.
homes. Like I'm a big like I
Of
think
course,
townhouses would be great. 3-bedroom townhouses, you got a little backyard
of
for the kids.
course, of
Why
course, of
not?
course.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think the Canada's. We started this conversation talking about recession, or Canada's in for a lot of pain, and it comes, and it's because of the productivity piece. You can't. That ultimately, that's the only way to emancipate the working class. And you need to improve productivity, and you improve productivity by having an appropriate immigration mix. You improve productivity by facilitating investment in some critical industries. You improve productivity by keeping interest rates at not stupidly low levels to encourage
Love the rate of
real
inflation.
investment away from real estate. Sorry to
Yeah.
disparage your industry.
No, it's true.
I
I've been saying that for a long time. We can't build this economy on speculative
No,
housing that people need
you
and public sector jobs.
Yeah, well, you beat me to it. So I was about to say, you
Yeah.
cannot increase productivity growth by having 40% of your employment growth come from public sector. That's another chart I like to show. From 2019 to now, 41.3% of all jobs are in the public sector. That's bogus. That's not the way an economy, that's not a sustainable way of running an economy. And
But it's
so
a good way to get votes.
it's an excellent way to get votes.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Anyways, Rich, I'll let you go because I know you said you were really busy today, but we went for an hour 14. I could have kept going, but it's so good to have you on again, man. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I learn a lot every time you come on this pod. So thanks so much, man.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity. And yeah, check out the IceCap Canadian Market Wrap.
Yeah, I'm going to leave everything that Rich does down below. He's 1/3 of the Loonie Hour, the best podcast in Canada. You can tell I listen to it because I take words out of his mouth. And his YouTube channel, the IceCap Market Wrap.
Yeah, IceCap Canadian Market Wrap.
IceCap Canadian Market Wrap. I'll leave that down below. Rich manages money for families as well, so get in touch with him if that interests you. And yeah, thanks so much for watching, guys. Thanks and take care. We'll see you next week.